Hello everyone, Justin here with an introduction for a new series here on Monsters, Madness, and Magic. Now long time, and I do mean very long time, listeners will remember that initially the show was created to casually discuss and explore some occult and esoteric themes, which we still do with the majority of our guests. But with this new series that I'm going to call Ways of the Wyrd, I'm going to delve into the hidden realms of the occult and the many manifestations of the macabre, focused on some supernatural beings that lurk in the shadow. The series will supplement our continued chats and interviews and provide more relevant content for listeners craving a bit more of the paranormal side of things. I want to repeat, the interviews are going nowhere. We're going to maintain our schedule. This is just a little something extra. So, with that being said, in our first entry of Ways of the Wyrd, we will discuss the many historical accounts of werewolfery as put forth by occult scholar and theologian Montague Summers in his work, The Werewolf in Lore and Legend. I thank you all for your continued support, and I hope you enjoy this new series. And without further ado, here you go. Werewolf, Wolfman, the Loup-Garou, Lycanthrope. Stalking from the shadows of the silver screen and lurking in age-old myths and modern campfire tales, the image of a wolf which walks like a man has long haunted the nightmares of humanity. Legends of werewolves are present in all corners of the known world, from China, the whole of Europe and South America, to the jungles of Africa, the swamps of the American Deep South, and the vast forests of the Midwest and beyond. One need not search too rigorously through any regional book of folklore to find a remnant of the monsters born of the moonlight. Perhaps it is the werewolf's close proximity to us in nature which disturbs us so. After all, it's not too far removed from its own humanity. In fact, in some myths, they are indeed men or women, which under certain circumstances, spells, or curses, revert to a more fierce and primitive resemblance of ourselves. Before we travel through the mists of time and discuss the alleged accounts of werewolfery throughout history, I want to first acknowledge our source for this exploration. Montague Summers was an English author, clergyman, and scholar, born April 10th, 1880. Summers studied and published many works on occultism and beings of supposed supernatural origins, the history of witchcraft and demonology, the vampire, his kith and kin, witchcraft and black magic, vampires and vampirism, all writings mostly viewed through the theological lens of the Catholic Church. One such work, titled The Werewolf in Lore and Legend, originally published in 1933, is a collection of historical accounts gathered predominantly from Eastern and Western European sources, which we will be citing from for the purpose of this video. In addition to his books on the occult, Summers is best known in the world of academia for his editing of the literature of Elizabethan poets, novelists, and playwrights, known as the Gothic Quest, which is still widely considered the standard on the history of the Gothic novel. Before we continue on, however, it would be wise for us to consider several interesting points highlighted by editor and publisher Felix Morrow, who was responsible for the reprinting and mass production of many of the works of Montague Summers, about the man himself and his relationship to the esoteric subjects in which he dedicated his life to, and to perhaps add context to his knowledge and interest in mysticism. The legitimacy of Montague Summers as a devout Roman Catholic is not necessarily in question. However, the time in his life in which he became a man of faith is a point of dispute, and one that is important concerning the nature and perceived religious slant of his studies. Morrow points to the challenge of the Catholic faith of Montague Summers by Father Herbert Thurston, a Jesuit author, known for his articles on witchcraft in the Catholic Encyclopedia. In response to a critique offered by Summers on Thurston's work on witchcraft, Thurston publicly questions Summers on his ecclesiastical authority and bids him to reveal which church had ordained him in his faith, a commentary that Summers never addressed directly. As stated previously, Summers was known in his later years as a devout man of the cloth, but it is his early years in which he studied abroad, gathering data on topics of magic and the supernatural, which is often argued. In reviews of his early output on the world of the occult, he is never explicitly referred to as a priest. Morrow says, he came down from Oxford sometime early in the century. He leaves the Church of England sometime around 1910 and ceases to have a public existence until nearly 15 years later, when he collaborates with the Stage Society and appears in his box at the Restoration Dramas. In 1926, at the age of 46, he publishes his first book on the subjects in question, The History of Witchcraft. These dates lend credence to the unfriendly story told of him, that when he left the Church of England, he spent the ensuing years in France and Italy in occult circles, becoming an adept in black magic, and it was only then that he assumed clerical garb. Morrow goes on to underline the prevalence of occult circles in Europe at the turn of the century, orders such as the Golden Dawn, which such prominent literary and political figures as William Butler Yeats and Lord Dunsany belonged to and participated in the rites of. Morrow concludes, perhaps it is curious that one can find no personal reference by Summers to what he must have seen with his eyes in these circles during his years on the continent, that the fascination of the occult never left him, the reader will find in the following pages. A final point of order to bring to the forefront before we continue on is Montague Summers' own distinction of the cases and accounts mentioned in the introduction to the werewolf in lore and legend. In attempting to define the term werewolf, Summers states thus, "It should be remarked that in a secondary or derivative sense, the word werewolf has been erroneously employed to denote a person suffering from lycanthropy, that mania or disease when the patient imagines himself to be a wolf, and under that savage delusion betrays all the bestial propensities of the wolf, howling in a horrid, long-drawn note. This madness will hardly at all concern us here. That is to say, the accounts within the book have been carefully curated by Summers to include only those which display a complete metamorphosis into the shape of a wolf, maintaining all of the characteristics of said creature, including strength, swiftness, and appetite, according to eyewitness testimonies, judicial or clerical speculation, and so on, excluding clear cases of the mental ailment known as lycanthropy. Summers points to the ability to maintain this state is often temporary and short-term, being obtained by ritual, often attributed to goetic practices. At times, this affliction can be hereditary, with the original human form being assumed at will by the werewolf. I believe this is an important distinction to contemplate as we now proceed to the point and examine a few of the more obscure cases of werewolfery presented on the pages of the Werewolf in lore and legend. Our first account comes to us from the Diocese of Clermont, within the Auvergne region of France, concerning French soldier Rimbaud de Poignet. No specific dates are given in regards to this event. However, a French nobleman by the name of Ponce de Castra outlawed and exiled Rimbaud for reasons that are not quite clear. Upon his banishment, Rimbaud wandered the countryside. One night, the soldier was stricken with a sickness, and when he returned to his own native village, it was reported that he changed into the image of a wolf and began to attack the locals. Several farmers and nobles were attacked, displaying bite marks about their bodies. At last, the local carpenter of the village set out to hunt and attack Rimbaud in his bestial form, and with a swift blow from his axe, severed one of the claw-like paws of the werewolf, forcing the shifter to revert to its human shape. Rimbaud publicly states after the affair that he was pleased to have lost his limb, saving him from his curse. In this region, it was a commonly held diagnosis that if a werewolf were to lose one of its limbs, then the creature could recover his original body. The second story, involving a tale of a man's metamorphosis into a wolf, is offered from the Diocese of Mendy in the neighborhood of Chaillot, regarding a man called Calcevaria, who is known there amongst the locals as a werewolf. It is reported that during nights when the moon was full, Calcevaria would travel to a distant spot within the woods nearest the town and strip himself naked, laying all of his clothes amongst the thorn bushes. There he would roll about in the sand until he rose in the form of the wolf, displaying all the fierce appetites of the animal and raging forth through the village, tongue lolling, jaws gaping, as he attacked his prey. When questioned about this in his human form, he described that wolves would run with their mouths open because it makes their swift nature easier to maintain, for if they closed their mouths, they could not easily unclench their teeth, making them easier to capture. Our third case offers more specifics in terms of dates and the characters at play. In the fall of 1216, King John Lackland was pillaging the eastern countryside and villages of England. On the 8th of October, he desecrated the church of St. Gulthach at Croyland, an event which caused him to lose many of his supplies and the majority of his soldiers. Lackland continued on in a fit of rage to the Abbey of Swineshead, near Bolton, where he began to consume the peaches of the grove in excess. Dysentery struck him, along with a foul fever. By the 16th of October, it was clear to him and his remaining followers that death was near. The abbot of Croxton tended to the dying king, who passed on the 19th. As decreed by his will, he was buried in Worcester Cathedral at the feet of the high altar. Soon after his death, strange legends began to creep throughout the land. In the Chronicles of England, it is described in detail that a monk of Swineshead was appalled at the king's wicked displays and the famine he swore upon England until his last breath. The monk is then said to have went forth into the gardens of Swineshead, finding a toad, which he pierced with a needle, and then, using the venom to infect the king's drink, he offered it to King Lackland, after sipping from the goblet himself. There are many variations of the monk's tale on how King John Lackland met his end, though the part of the account which meets our needs here is that after the evil monarch's death at the hands of the monk, terrible noises, howls, shrieks, and clawing were heard within his tomb betwixt the shrines of St. Oswald and St. Wulstan. Sir Walter of Hemmingburg reported to the authorities of the time that old King John Lackland may not rest in his burial. After many nights of the howlings from the crypts had alerted and frightened the townsfolk, the canons of Worcester disinterred his body and cast his carcass, which was embalmed by the abbot of Croxton, out of the sanctuary onto a strip of unconsecrated ground. The body was identified as King John Lackland. Though his features were now distorted with a hideous grin, his figure was seen throughout the village in this shape, terrifying many of the men and women in their farmhouses. It is noted that, perhaps in confusion, this account is curious because these signs point to known cases of vampirism, though many claim to have seen the dead king in the shape of a wolf. The following account is a most rare one indeed, as not only do the werewolves speak, it is in question if the creatures themselves are representative of the divine nature of God. In his book, Topographia Hibernica, Giraldus Cambensis recounts the encounter. 3 years prior to the arrival of Prince John in the land of Ireland, it is chanced that a certain priest, in his journey from Ulster to Meath, was benighted in the woods on the boundaries of Meath. While he and his young companion were warming themselves by firelight, sheltering under the branches of a large tree, there came upon them a wolf, who addressed them in the following words: "Do not alarm yourselves, and do not be afraid. You need not fear where there is no reason to fear." The travelers were alarmed and astonished at the wolf's words nonetheless. Then the wolf called upon the name of God, causing the priest to charge him in the name of the Almighty God, that he should do them no harm, but rather bid the wolf inform them as to what sort of creature could speak in the words of a human. The wolf thus replied: "In number we are 2, natives of Ossory, and every 7 years, on account of the curse laid upon our folk by the blessed Abbot St. Castilus, a score of us are compelled to throw off the human form and appear in the shape of wolves. At the end of our 7-year charge, if we survive, we are able to return again to our homes, reclaiming our bodies, and 2 others must take our place among the trees. Howbeit my wife, who labors not far from hence, is grievously sick. I beseech you and your good charity to comfort her and aid us with your priestly office." The wolf then led the priest and his companion to a tree at no great distance, and the pair trembled at the strangeness of the event. In the hollow of the tree, the two beheld a wolfen, groaning with the ferocity of a wolf mingled with human sighs. She beheld the priest and thanked him for such consolation in her hour of need, and thus the priest performed the last rite most earnestly, administering to her the crown of the bloody Lord. To remove any doubt from the traveling priest and his servant, the male wolf took his clawed hand and removed the pelt from the female wolf, to reveal much of her navel, where it was plainly seen as the body of an old woman below the head of a wolf. The holy rites now having been performed in full, the man-wolf joined their company by the fire and showed himself as a human, not a four-footed beast. In the early dawn, he led the men out of the woods and left them to pursue their journey, pointing out to them the shortest route. As they were parting, the priest inquired of the man-wolf whether their enemy, the invaders of England, who had now landed upon their shores, would continue to possess the land. The wolf replied, "On account of the sins of our nation and the enormous wickedness of the anger of God which has fallen upon our evil generation, hath delivered us into the hands of our enemy. Therefore, so long as this foreign people shall walk in the way of the Lord and keep his commandments, they shall be safe and not subdued." In regards to the wolf's mentioning of the curse of the men of Ossory, it is previously written in the Book of Ballymote, a collection of histories and legends in the early 15th century. One passage states, "The children of the wolf in Ossory could transform themselves and go abroad to devour folk." A Latin poem of the 13th century titled "The Wonders of Ireland," and printed by Thomas Wright and published in the Reliquiae Antiquiae, has 14 lines which say, "There are certain men of the Celtic race who have a marvelous power which comes from their forebears. For by an evil craft they can, at will, change into the shape of wolves with sharp and tearing teeth, and after thus transformed, will they fall upon poor defenseless sheep. But when folk armed with clubs and weapons run to meet them, then do they flee and scour away. Now when they are minded to transform themselves, they leave their own bodies, charging their friends neither to move or touch them at all, however lightly, for if this be done, never will they be able to return to their human shape again. If whilst they are wolves, any one who hurts or harms them, then upon their own bodies the exact wound or mark can plainly be seen." This same account of the priest and the wolf is given the name "The Descendants of the Wolves Are in Ossory" in the Irish version of the Historia Brittonum of Nennius of Bangor. The following instance occurred in France on December 21st, 1521, at Poligny. Pierre Burgot and Michael Verdun were taken to trial before Inquisitor General Jean Boyne. The trial took place over several days, ending with the confession of Pierre Burgot. 19 years prior to the trial, on the day of the Poligny Fair, a mighty storm rolled through the land, scattering his flock of animals. There, 3 riders in black came upon him, all riding black steeds. One of the 3 inquired as to what was ailing Pierre, and he confessed that he would be left poor and hungry if he could not locate his flock in the storm, should they be lost forever or fall prey to the wild beasts of the area. One of the men, or as Pierre says, one of the demons, claimed that if Pierre would acknowledge and serve him as his one true Lord, then his sheep would be returned without harm, in addition to any amount of money he would need. Pierre accepted the man's offer and agreed to meet him several nights later to seal the pact. Keeping to his promise, Pierre met the men in black, kneeling before him in homage, renouncing God and all the company of heaven. He then kissed the demon's hand, which Pierre describes as completely black and cold, like that of a corpse. The demon declared the oath sealed and bid Pierre to call on him when in need, under the name Moise. As the years passed, Pierre grew weary of the pact to the Black One, and he was eventually recalled to the village of Plain by his accomplice, Michael Verdun, where the pair attended the Sabbath of a company of warlocks, Verdun and Pierre strip naked and apply a specific salve, after which he and Verdun turned into werewolves. The two prowled the woods, with Pierre stating their speed was that of the wind. Together, Michael and Pierre attacked a boy of 7 years old, tearing him to pieces. They were discovered in the act and fled into the woods, escaping capture. On several occasions, Pierre admits they would feast on women, gathering peas. Pierre states they became addicted to the warmness of flowing fresh blood. The pair confessed to several more murders, including that of a 4-year-old little girl, whom they devoured save for one arm. Burgot and Verdun also claimed they would frequently breed with female wolves, preferring this pleasure to that of a natural woman. Continuing with the accounts of French werewolves, on December of 1598, a tailor in Paris was sentenced to burn at the stake. The tailor is said to have lured children, both male and female, into his shop, and after abusing them, he would cut their throats. After the killing was done, the tailor would then powder and dress the bodies to make them appear as dolls, sometimes joining several bodies together, much like a butcher would tie meats. It is said in the twilight, the tailor, under the guise of a wolf, would roam the local woods, leaping out at passers-by and rip out their throats. Many barrels and casks of finely bleached bones were found in the cellar of his shop, as well as other foul things, which were not specifically mentioned. Summers goes on to state that the details of this specific case were so unpleasant that the court ordered many of the documents detailing the case to be burned and the ashes spread wide. Earlier in the same year, a trial took place in Annecy, where an archer of the Provost Company and a few of his fellow men came across the mutilated body of a nude boy, assumed to be aged 15 or so. His limbs were drenched in blood and still palpitating, according to the eyewitness accounts. As the men approached the scene, 2 large wolves on hind legs bounded away in the forest. The men gave chase, as they were heavily armed, and to their surprise, they discovered a tall, gaunt creature of a man with matted hair and long nails clotted with red human flesh and blood. The company of men could barely contain the wild figure. Once they had the creature bound, he confessed before the local magistrate that he and his brother John and cousin Julian were traveling from village to village, preying on the local children. He later confessed that as a child, his parents had devoted his soul to the devil, and by using a salve, he could assume the form of a werewolf and was possessed with a bestial appetite. The 2 large wolves discovered at the scene he confessed as John and Julian. The man would go on to describe, in precise detail, the exact time and place of recent attacks and the manner in which the bodies were found, that the local authorities had yet to solve. The man was condemned to death. However, the Parliament of Paris ultimately decided that he should be confined within the hospital of Saint-Germain to be instructed in the ways of God. During his time at the hospital, the man refused to communicate in words and would utter animal sounds throughout the night. His fate after his sentencing to the hospital is not known. In the spring of 1608, within the district of Gascony in the southwest of France, a number of terrible attacks were reported from the outlying hamlets and smaller villages. Children were going missing by the dozens, some from fields where they were working, some off roads. In one case, a small infant was taken directly from its cradle after its mother had left it alone, but for a short time. Rumors began to swirl of wolves and things worse than wolves. The local magistrate advised the judge of barony that information concerning these numerous attacks had been brought to his attention by 3 witnesses, one of which was a young girl of 13 named Marguerite. Marguerite swore under oath that in the full moon she had been attacked by a beast resembling a wolf. While she was watching her father's cattle, a wild beast with ruffled fur bounded at her from a nearby thicket and tore at her with its sharp teeth. She only managed to save her life due to the fact that she was armed with an iron-pointed staff, which she used to stab the wolf. In this same village, a teenage boy named Jean Grenier boasted that he was the one who had attacked young Marguerite, and if not for her stick, he would have enjoyed her flesh. as he had already eaten 3 or 4 children himself. Jean Gaboreau, aged 18, confessed that one day while tending cattle with the suspected wolf, Jean Grenier, he confessed that he, at times, wears a wolf skin, adding that a man named Pierre Labouré had given him this pelt, and that when he donned it, he coursed the woods and fields as a wolf, terrorizing children. Jean claimed that there were 9 wolves in total of his coven, who would give chase to the children of the area during the waning moon on Mondays, Fridays, and Saturdays, and who loved to hunt in the twilight before dawn. According to Grenier, they lusted for the flesh of small children due to it being tender, plump, and rare. All of this information was officially lodged in the courts on May 29, 1603. During the trial, Grenier claims to have fled from the home of his father at a young age, and upon the meeting of a fellow youth named Pierre Tilhary, and was ushered into the depths of the woods near St. Anthony and brought before the Lord of the Woods. The Lord was a tall, dark man, dressed in all black, and riding a black charger. The Lord dismounted his charger and kissed Jean on the mouth. Grenier noted the man's kiss was as cold as ice. On the second meeting with the Lord of the Wood, Grenier confessed he gave his soul to the Lord, and was thus presented with a wolf skin. The trio transformed under the full moonlight, with the Lord's wolf form being much larger than the 2 boys. Grenier confessed to many of the crimes of infanticide throughout the area, and was sentenced to remain enclosed in the friary of St. Michael the Archangel at Bordeaux, being warned that should he attempt to escape, he would face the gallows. Pierre de Lancret, a local priest, visited the rumored loup-garou at St. Michael's in the year 1619, and found him to be extremely lean and gaunt, with deep-set black eyes that glared. His teeth were unusually long and sharp, and his hands resembled claws. He talked only of wolves, and fell upon all 4s, moving with extraordinary agility, and with greater ease than when he attempted to walk like a man. Jean Grenier told Pierre de Lancret that the Lord of the Forest had twice visited him at the friary, but he had warded him off using the sign of the cross. Jean Grenier died within the walls of St. Michael's in November of 1611. There are many tales and accounts collected by Montague Summers that are not covered in this video, most of which are sourced from court documents. Do some people possess the means to transform into a wolf? That is not for me to decide. Perhaps on the next night that the moon is full, you should venture out into the forest and discover that for yourself. If you happen to come across the Lord of the Woods, politely inform His Majesty that we will see him on the next episode of Ways of the Weird.